Cyphers. We used to be called sorcerers, a rare breed of being that could wield mind-controlling powers. In reality, we could control electrical impulses, but we didn't come into our own until the first real computers were invented. Then we became tech gods. While we are still at an advantage to most, even those days are past now. Now, we're a curiosity in a world where tech bridges all the gaps and has mostly replaced magic. My name's Ulf Whitlock. I'm one of a small number of people who has inherited the powers of the Cyphers. I'm also a hunter. I track down criminals for the government and that juicy paycheck. I even have my own badge. I take on all types: orcs, elves, goblins. Shoot first, ask questions maybe. That's how Dad did it, it's how his dad did it, and I'm one for tradition. Welcome to the world of cybernetics and the punk, to my world of magic, blood, sweat and steel. Welcome to the Cyphers Edge. For the garden! The chant was eerie in the silence, with only the waves crashing far below the cliffs to counterpose it. The words were chorused, then the witches went quiet once more as the young woman, their leader, their mistress, lowered the black leather tome level with her chest, opening it gently balanced on one hand. Her hand dropped away and had hovered in midair. I had to give it to her. She had showmanship. There was no signal as far as I could tell, no significant movement, but I felt the surge in the magical field as they collectively tapped into it. I could feel it. My magical senses, usually dulled by comparison to other magic users, were making my hair stand on end. Two of the witches broke away from the circle and returned to us. The foremost was the one Jethro had tried to strike. Her smile was full of malice as she reached out, grasping for the orc. All of our bodies froze in the magical bonds that we were more than familiar with by now. The barrier must have been dropped, as between the two of them they dragged him against his will from the circle. He thrashed against the bonds. "You fucking cowards! You just hide behind that magic of yours!" He spat at the nearest witch. "You'll regret this!" Freedom of movement returned, as did the barrier. I scanned the area for anything I could think of to use to create a distraction. There was nothing here. The entire facility had only the bare minimum of tech. They laid Jethro down before the altar, the mistress looking down on him, arms spread wide, the book still open in the air before her. He tried to spit at her, swearing obscenities. She ignored him, the other two witches returning to their positions. I needed to find something, some crack to force open, but all there was this magic, nature-loving freak show. My attention returned to the altar as Mara spoke, her tone solemn. "The mind must be quiet to accept the change." A witch lifted a glass bottle of dark liquid using only her telekinesis. They forced Jethro's mouth open, pouring a small amount of the potion in. Jethro thrashed, trying to spit the liquid from his mouth, but they forced it shut. They chanted again, in Latin. Of course it was in damn Latin. "Please tell me you have a plan," Reva asked. Jethro had fallen still, his body now levitating just above the ground. I shook my head. "I've got nothing to tap into, there's nothing here." Mavic turned to me, roughly grabbing me by the collar. Anger flared up in his eyes, fueled by fear. "You said you were gonna get us out of this!" Reva stepped up, shoving him away roughly and leveling a finger at him. "Back off. It's not his fault you're here." "Back it up, princess, or I'll drop your green ass." I felt her anger flare up. "I'd like to see you try." Oh shit. It was barely a whisper from my lips, but they both paused and turned to look back at the ceremony. Jethro's body had begun to writhe and twist with every pulse of magic. It was so strong you could almost see the energy in the air without being attuned to it. Oh gods. Mavic moved to the invisible barrier, putting his hands hard up against it, trying to push in vain through it. "Jeth!" His fists hammered on the air. It silently rippled under his blows, distorting our vision. The chanting grew in volume. The orc's muscles started to bulge and shift into new arrangements. His bones cracked and reset. The shape of his body changed to be even more heavy-set. but hunched, his neck shrinking into his chest, his face a picture of silent pain. His augmentations fell from him, no longer fitting the new shape of his limbs. Where they left bloody stumps behind, the magic tried to regrow them. Blood morphed into vague shapes, becoming solid and shiny, almost crystalline in nature. Mavic kept up his barrage in vain, hammering with every word. Then a purple crack of light split the orc's face. Mara looked up from the book, her face showing clear annoyance. They seemed to redouble their efforts. It didn't help. Another crack of light along his arms, then his legs, his clothes ripped to shred by the deformations of his body, his skin bare below. All at once he exploded. Purple light flashed bright, so bright it was almost white. I covered my eyes, but the flare of light left me blinking as my vision recovered. White light seared onto the world. The magical surge dropped away. I could hear them moving about. I could make out vague images of the witches gathering up chunks of what was left, carrying the mess away. "Another!" Mara commanded. "The other green skin." "Reaver!" I reached out wildly, groping towards her. My movements halted as we were bound again, my panic mirroring her own. Fear and anger surged within her. "You touch me and I'll rip your fucking arms off." I could see enough to see the shape of her torn from the spot beside me by invisible hands. Free from magic all at once, I reached out, but I wasn't fast enough. My fingers brushed hard air. She screamed and tried to fight the invisible bonds as she was lowered onto the same spot as Jethro. She fought against the telekinesis that had held her mere inches from the ground, but it was futile. I switched to my other sight. I wasn't going to let them take her, not after all I'd put her through. There had to be some tech around here, something other than magic. They force-fed her the potion. She continued to fight, though her movements seemed to weaken. I felt the energy, the raw magic, rise again as they tapped into it. It was amplifying their power. It made them stronger. It gave them more options. It broke the rules. I looked down at my own hands. Realization dawning. It broke the rules. Like my sword. I shouldn't have been able to do what I did back in the swamp. The amount of power I had manifested, I had funneled. I wasn't even meant to be able to funnel external sources, but I had. Closing my eyes, still seeing only pure energy signatures, I breathed in deep. I felt it pour into my skin through my veins. My heart rate jumped as the new ethereal drug filled every ounce of my body. I looked to Mara, her face locked in concentration as she began the ceremony anew. A tether of blue light linked her to the book and then to Reaver, but it was flashing on and off like there was a bad connection. Despite it all, she was only just able to harness the spell she was attempting. I reached out a hand towards her. I extended my senses, letting the magic flood my body. It was like being high, but my mind was perfectly clear. If anything, it was sharper. I could feel her. I could feel her emotions. I could hear her thoughts. I could feel the urge to puppet her. I opened my eyes. Across my vision sprang a ring of yellow glowing hieroglyphs. My whole arm was wrapped in a lattice of them. I focused. They spun faster. Then I brought my splayed fingers back into a fist. Her mouth froze mid-chant. No sound escaped. No breath either. Shock, panic, her eyes turned to me. Whether she could feel me too or she was just that attuned to the magic that she could trace it back to its source, her eyes widened as she realized the truth. The blue light tether broke. Reaver fell to the ground. I could still feel her too. She was still conscious, but only just. The chanting ceased as the rest of the coven realized the disruption. Then a wave of force shot from the two witches nearest. It broke on the shield that surrounded us, hard air rippling like water struck with falling stones. Foolish. I grinned and reached out with the other hand, drawing in more magic. I could feel my veins burn with it. I started to laugh as the yellow hieroglyphs encased my arm again. "You'll have to do better than that," The holographic-style magical glyphs that had only ever been small visual manifestations of my magic and ability now clad my entire body like fine woven armor made of a lattice of light. I felt my consciousness invade the two attackers. This wasn't conventional hacking. This was the sorcerous magic my ancestors had wielded of old. I snapped my fingers. They dropped to the ground unconscious. This was power. This was next fucking level. I felt the surge of power from Mara, and the link I held with her shuddered. She was pushing back. Mara was clearly the most powerful one here. I suspected she drew on the Coven in some way. Somehow they were all linked to her. I made to focus on her completely, but the rest of the witches began to move in on us, hands raised, spells being summoned. They weren't stupid. They would drop the barrier before the next attack. Be ready, I said in a more calm voice than I felt. Sam, Mavic, get somewhere safe when the barrier drops. Mavic took up a fighting stance beside me. He had no weapons and no magic. Don't be fucking stupid, I rebuked him. He ignored me. Sam huddled down behind us. I shut down 2 more witches, then felt the barrier disappear. My hold on Mara was slipping. The women in front of us were about to release everything they had. I dropped the link completely and rushed forward. My punch dagger burst from my arm. I didn't wait for first contact as balls of fire flared to life in their hands. I activated the Hermes. The whole coven slowed to a glacial pace as I descended upon them, teeth bared, magic in one hand, blade in the other. I used the unlimited magic flowing through my blood and turned it into raw electricity. It was something I'd only ever done with the help of my sword before, but now my left hand grasped necks and faces, filling them with enough amps to fry their brains in a split second. With my right arm I slashed at throats, blood sprayed into the air in glorious fountains. One after another fell to my touch. I looked behind me. Mavic had only just broken the circle, his fists raised, a scream on his lips. I could only keep this up for so long, though. Those at the back had just enough time to realize what I had done. Their bodies dissolved into smoke, flitting to the rooftops far from my touch, even as I dropped their sisters around me. Now wasn't the time to run myself into the ground. I made it to a pillar of stone, putting my back against it as the temporal whiplash hit. I gasped in air and looked around. Several dead littered the ground, a bloody and smoke-filled path that led to me. Witches all around us. We were still outnumbered. Mavic had grabbed one by the collar and punched her into next week, but that was all he would manage as her sisters immobilized him again. You dare defile this circle with your filthy sorcery! My head whipped around to see Mara, hands raised, book gone, out of harm's way. Blue fire engulfed both her arms. You will burn! She screamed like a banshee. She thrust her hands in front of herself in a gesture of rejection. A horizontal pillar of flame lanced towards me from her open palms. I reactivated my speed unit and dodged the fire. I made a beeline for her. The fire, however, traced me. It almost kept up. She was barely moving, her teeth bared, her whole body tense. Her eyes, however, were focused on me. She was using magic to speed herself up, just enough. I ran out of time and threw myself behind another pillar of stone. I took in lungfuls of air and reached out with my mind, trying to tap into her again. She was ready this time. Magical barriers pushed me back. You won't get me that easy a second time. I risked a look around the stone to see Mavic pinned to the ground and Reva still laying motionless. I gathered all my strength, summoning as much power as I could hold without bursting. I rolled out from behind the stone pillar, hands raised to focus a mental shutdown towards her. It rocked her, but it wasn't enough. The backlash knocked me off my feet. I rolled across the ground, mind fuzzy. I will eat your soul! She cried out, lightning beginning to crackle across her fingers, her eyes only for me. There was a flash of white from the shadows at her back. So fast I barely saw it. Her torso erupted in a spray of blood. A fist jutted out of where her stomach should have been. Not if I eat yours first. Caliban. He stood behind her, naked and covered head to toe in fresh pink scars. He sunk his teeth into her neck, like a wolf biting into its prey. Mara cried out in agony. Losing all control of her magic, the lightning arced off in every direction, grounding itself on whatever it could within range. Every witch still alive let loose a communal scream. I was right, they were all connected. Many of them fell to their knees in shared pain. I used the distraction to try and locate Sam. I looked to where she had been huddled down behind me in the circle. It was empty. She wasn't far though, she had been captured again. Gagged and bound, her body moved through the air slowly, hovering above the ground only meters from a pair of witches. They clutched at their heads, trying to regain their focus. There was no way I was going to make that distance before they got their hands on her. I would have had to run too far and too fast. My body couldn't take the shock of a third burst. Sam's body began to rise and move again, speeding up as the witches came back to their senses. I was about to reach out and try and shut them down when I felt the air beside me move, like a car had just sped past. The two women were thrown off their feet, heads snapping back at unnatural angles. Sam fell to the ground, landing unexpectedly and awkwardly. She didn't waste time stumbling to her feet and running for cover. Another witch hit the deck and Reva shimmered back into real time. She was sweating hard, panting, but she was awake. Her detox unit had processed whatever they had forced upon her and rejected it from her system. It was an impressive piece of kit. She caught my eye, winked, then blurred out of reality again. Lightning tore apart the ground where she had been. I spun, reaching out my senses to the witches on the rooftops, but they had time to prepare some kind of magical guard against me. I came up against it. I felt it give a little, but it held fast. I gave up. I didn't have time for this. I rushed to Sam, joining her behind a boulder for safety as Reva drew the attention of the magical artillery. She moved from place to place, pausing just long enough to keep their aim tracing her. She was pushing herself. She was going longer than I knew I could have. I feared what toll it was taking on her body. "I'd like to go back to my cell now," Sam said, muffled, hands protecting her face from flying debris. "Just to be clear," I said as I flinched back from a flying chunk of rock, "I didn't intend this to get out of hand." "Speak for yourself. I haven't had this much fun in years." I looked up to the voice beside me. Caliban had somehow joined us without me even noticing. He stood there looking pleased with himself, licking blood from his fingers. "Man, am I glad to see you." If they thought ripping me into a dozen pieces was going to slow me down, they were severely mistaken. "Managed to pull yourself together then, huh?" He smiled, the razor-sharp teeth glazed in red, his eyes bloodshot and just a little crazy. "Yes, and now I really must go repay the favor." He looked to the elevated attackers, then, with a burst of speed, crossed the ground ahead of us and ascended the wall like a spider. He was fast, damn fast. If he didn't have less than 24 other vampires below him in the bloodline, I would have been surprised. I turned my attention back to Reva. I found her hunkered down behind the altar, catching her breath. Mara lay near her, her lifeless body sprawled in an unnatural position, arms and legs at odd angles, her face covered in blood. "So, what do we do now?" Sam asked, flinching as a fireball burst on the stone at our backs. "Well, I'm up to plan wing it right now, sorry." She pulled her legs up to her chest and leant in close to get away from the flames scorching the ground beside her. She replied with something muttered into her hands, but I wasn't really paying attention. I just felt something in the back of my mind. "Reva." I glanced around our cover. She was still behind the altar, her eyes locked on me. We both looked to the top of the massive red brick structure where the vampire was playing tag with two of the sisters. They swapped between black smoke and their solid form as they each dodged the other and attempted to land a killing blow. I jolted mentally as Reva's emotions spiked. "Ulf!" Her cry was cut off. Dread rose inside me in a split second. I looked back to the altar. Mara stood there once more, her black robes dripping in blood, her right hand reaching out, gripping Reva by the throat, lifting her off the ground with apparent ease. I was still seeing through my other sight. Mara radiated power. Her wounds were no longer bleeding but shrouded in black smoke. Her eyes jet black, her veins inflamed and writhing beneath her skin, they pulsed with magic, and I wondered if that was how I looked moments ago. The dark mistress of the garden was drawing in immense levels of magic to put herself back together. Resurrection was near impossible in normal circumstances. I could make out the complex patterns of energy in the wards around her, though I couldn't understand them. Her offhand held the black leather tome. "Did you really think it would be that easy? What in all the hells?" I could hardly believe what I was seeing. "No, no, no, no." Sam began to babble in fear. Through all that, my eyes were drawn to another energy signature. It wasn't far off in the jungle below us, but it was moving fast and getting bigger. I got to my feet, hands above my head, taking one step to one side of the stone we hid behind. Okay, let her go, and you can have me." Mara's laugh was edged with crazy. "It's too late for that now." River's arms spread wide. Mara giggled like a child pulling the wings off a fly. "First, I'm going to tear her apart while you watch." River screamed as her body was pushed to its limits, limbs splayed. I began to absorb as much magic as I could hold. "Then I'm going to leave just enough of you alive to enjoy the spectacle as I transform that blood-sucking parasite and the rest of what's left of you all." I could still hear the fight going on the rooftop. Either Mara didn't care or she had full confidence in her followers. "Last chance to say goodbye." She splayed her hand. Reva cried out in pain. I threw up my own hands, dropping all the magic at once. "Wait. What?" It was only seconds, barely bought, but it was all the time I needed. A crash of falling branches in the trees behind her, the sound of destruction bearing down on us. I smiled wide. Nothing. Mara turned her head just in time to see a blinded and enraged monster of a lizard burst through the trees and shake the earth as it landed in the clearing. It roared ferocious in its anger. The game changed in an instant. All attention shifted to the beast, now taking up a large portion of the open ground. Its head was engulfed in flame in a moment. Lightning crackled against its hide. It flinched in pain but didn't go down. It was the wrong thing to do. Turning their attacks on the creature, it had come here for me. Following my scent, I had no doubt. They hadn't known that though, and now it had more immediate interests. Mara dropped Reva, fully focused on the hulk of a lizard. Caliban dove from the building, landing like an acrobat mere meters from me. "What the hell is that doing here?" I threw up my hands. "Apparently holding grudges." Reva crawled away from the altar, then made a sprint for us, joining us in the increasingly small amount of cover the stone provided. "What the actual fuck?" she swore at me. I laughed. Out of the frying pan into the fire. There was another crash and the beast whipped its tail, destroying the altar. We ducked as flying timbers littered the air. The few remaining witches had formed a kind of circle around it, some still atop the building, some on the ground. "I vote we make a break for it," Reva said between coughs as she massaged her throat. "Where's Mavic?" Caliban asked in an altogether too casual tone. "I really should return with at least one of them alive." I shrugged. "I don't know." He disappeared after Reva took out his opposition. "I saw him crawl off towards the building," Sam said, flinching every time the ground shook. Probably already legging it towards the horizon if he's smart. As if in answer to my skepticism, a war cry issued from an archway in the building behind us. We all looked to see the crazed form of Mavic running at full pelt, shotguns in each hand firing wildly into the melee. None of the witches nor the mutant reptile paid him any attention. Not that it mattered, none of his shots seemed to make their targets anyway. "Is somebody gonna stop him?" Reva asked, as shocked as the rest of us. Caliban hushed her. No, let's see where this goes." I tore my eyes off the suicidal elf long enough to frown at the vampire. "What happened to your reputation of returning with tourists alive?" He sighed, disappointed. Fine. With preternatural speed, he crossed the open space to Mavic in a blink and collected him up in his arms, pulling the swearing and still firing Hunter back into our hiding space. I'll kill them all! I'll fucking kill them all! Let me reload! I'll kill them all! Calivan ripped the guns from his grasp for our own protection. I reached out with my powers, tapping into his emotions and attempted to calm him. Mavic! Mavic! Focus! He stopped spewing vows of vengeance long enough to become aware of his surroundings. I pointed to the guns. Where did you find those? His chest heaved as he breathed in deep. He blinked, collecting his thoughts at last. What? I repeated myself. Oh, the building. I found where they stashed all our stuff. I nodded. Show me. We all made for the red brick walls as the fight continued to rage behind us. Tucked away in a room just off the main entrance were all our belongings. Immediately I saw the glint of my sword, its muddy but polished hilt and ragged tassel. I lifted it from the pile, hooking it to my belt, and I felt a wave of relief. I never would have forgiven myself if I'd lost it for good. My eye was then drawn to one other thing I'd come for. Alice sat leaning against one wall, still fully intact, still loaded. I didn't waste any time. I didn't wait to see what everyone else was doing. I needed to act fast. I collected my rifle and ran to the courtyard. The scene was still pandemonium. Only 2 of the coven still drew breath. Gods knew what had happened to the others. It was safe to bet that our big friend had gotten a few snacks in. I fell to one knee, flipping the tripod out and sighting down the gun in one fluid motion. Mara flitted from spot to spot. She was unleashing some serious spells of fire and lightning onto the beast. It was showing signs of starting to weaken. I didn't doubt that given time, she probably would have beaten it. I wasn't going to give her a chance though. I tracked her, getting a feel for her rhythm, slowing my breathing, waiting for just the right moment. She alighted on what had once been the altar and let rip with a lance of blue fire. My crosshair lined up with her temple. Let's see you come back from this. My finger contracted on the trigger. She saw me too late. Her head exploded. The other witches cried out in shared pain. Her magical link had still been strong. The lizard reached out a brutish clawed foot and brought it down on the other witches, crushing them into the mud and stone of the battlefield as they were distracted. It lashed its massive tail from side to side. Its hide shivered and it tilted its head, listening for any remaining attackers. I stopped the smile that had been spreading across my face as it sniffed the air. Those bloody sockets where the eyes had been panned towards me. Ah, crap. It charged my position. I got to my feet, dropping the rifle without a second thought. I ran as fast as I could. It crashed into the brick pillars behind where I had been. Not finding its prey, it sniffed the air again. Changing its course, it broke into another gallop towards me. I dodged from side to side, for all the good it did. Ulf! Reva and the rest had emerged from the building. She looked ready to charge into battle, but didn't know where to start. Kind of busy, I shouted back, rolling away as the tail lashed the ground beside me. She pointed behind me. The cliff! I risked a look towards the open air beyond the basalt stone edge. Why hadn't I thought of that? I ran and tripped over stones and timber, trying to get to the ground on the other side of the creature. With every attempt I made to get past it, it somehow knew and brought its foot or its tail down ahead of my path. I risked it all and made for one last ditched effort. I vaulted the spine-covered tail. I didn't slow as I leapt high and finally made it over and past the lashing appendages. I continued as I rolled to my feet, dodging past claws that tore up furrows in the dirt and scored the stone. It halted, listening, tasting the air. I came to a stop between it and a sheer drop to the waves and pointed rocks below. Come on, come get some. As if it needed any more encouragement. Its bulk shifted and it began to charge towards me before its head had even whipped around to point in my direction. I backed up a few more steps, holding my breath, eyes locked onto it, all my focus in its massive body closing in on me. I had to hold my position. I had to keep it on track until the last minute. I couldn't give it a chance to change course. The burnt and bloody face drew closer, more open wide, teeth the size of my forearm, a gullet I could have crawled down. I was mesmerized. I was afraid. I was too late. Time slowed, not because I was using any tech, not because of any magic, but for the first time in ages, because of fear. My death advanced on me, and I had waited too long. I had backed up too far. The stone cliff on which I stood jutted out in a semicircle. The ground fell away not just behind me, but to either side as well. The creature's body was too wide. Safety was just too far away. A force impacted me from the side. My neck almost broke from the whiplash, but something steadied it. A hand, cool and metallic. I was lifted from my spot in the rocks and carried to safety as I watched the hulking lizard gallop blindly off the edge of the cliff. Its front legs and head began to fall into emptiness before its back legs had even left the ground. My saviour lost their footing and we tumbled, rolling over each other until we came to a tangled stop in the lush grass off to the side of the battlefield. Reva lay atop of me. Some of her servos and her limbs smoked, but that was nothing. Her body convulsed like she was having a seizure, her eyes rolling back in their sockets. She began to froth at the mouth. It had been too much for her body. She was tough and had tried one last dash, but 3 times was too many even for her. I grabbed her face with both my hands. Without thinking, I delved into her mind with my own. I took control of her nerves, her breathing, her heart rate. With all the delicacy I could conjure, I calmed her body. One arm reached down and I cradled her while I rested the other on her forehead. There was someone calling out, voices in the distance. They were nothing to me. Her body was strong. I just had to remind it. I just had to calm it down, restore it. I held her for what felt like ages, seconds dragging into minutes, minutes feeling like hours. At last the seizures slowed to twitches, her gaze far away at first, but eventually it focused on me. I let my hold on her drop away as I could feel her body regain control. Without thinking, I brushed her hair from her eyes. Blood smeared her cheeks. One of her tusks had its tip snapped off. She looked like death. I smiled down at her. That was fucking stupid. She coughed a small laugh. Yeah, but that's par for the course around here. I pulled her in close, rocking gently. Don't ever do that again. The 4 of us, not Caliban, spent some time in recovery, collecting our goods, checking the cells for any more prisoners. There was none that we could find, though none of us wanted to go all the way to the end of the deep passage to the sounds of animalistic wailing. While everyone else was occupied, I picked through the remains of Mara's robes. It was a grim business, but there were certain things that shouldn't be left laying around. The vampire made the trek back to the hovercrafts that he and the other tourists had come in on. They had been attacked while on foot and the 2 crafts were still intact. It was quite the trip back to the fort. Mavic was shaken by the events. Coming down from his battle-crazed high, it was starting to catch up with him. Sam was already past shock and just sat in contemplative silence, free at last. Reva was still weak. She lay wrapped in a blanket at my feet, eyes closed, getting what little rest she could as I piloted the craft. When we finally arrived back at the safety of the treetop fortress, Jarrow was more relieved than I would have given him credit for. I thought you were dead for sure, he said as he ran over to the hovercrafts, inspecting them for any damage. I can't decide if you're more glad that we survived or that we came back with 2 out of your 3 crafts intact, I said, supporting Reva with one arm. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad you're alive, he patted the hull next to him, but I'm more glad that I don't have to go out hunting for my gear. I'm sorry about the other craft, I said, nodding to the 2 that had returned. I'm not giving up my bike, Reva said, mustering some modicum of strength. Jarrow waved it off. We can figure that out later. With what the tourists left behind, I think I'm more than compensated. Won't Mavic object? I asked, actually concerned. He grinned and lifted one of our packs, slinging it over his shoulder, then grabbed the other one in his offhand. Like I said, we can figure it out later. You head inside. I'll get your things unloaded. I nodded and helped Reva walk towards the simple door that was our safety, food, and sleep. She wrapped an arm around my waist and leant her head on my shoulder as she limped along beside me. Jarrow called out casually from behind us. Your room is still free, by the way, if you want to get some rest. Or whatever. A warm feeling radiated from Reva. I peered down at her. She had the hint of a grin. Touching her as I was, I could hear her thoughts passing between us. Surely not. She had nearly died. She could barely stand. Surely she didn't have the energy to... I wasn't planning on standing. We almost fell backwards through the door to our room, my hands around her waist as I lifted her effortlessly into the air, her legs wrapping around mine. I really need to thank you for saving my life, I said, trying on my smoothest tone of voice. Her kisses were fast and soft on my neck, her small tusks pricking my skin. They sent shivers down my spine. No, really, I should thank you first, she said between kisses. I laughed and tried not to drop her, but we collapsed onto the bed. Our lips met, my hands tangled in her hair, her metal fingers digging into my back. I pulled back from her, just long enough to let her rip the torn and bloody shirt from my chest. I was about to return the gesture, her hands dropping to my belt, fumbling with the buckle, when there was a hammering at our door. Not a knock, a rapid hammering. You guys, you're gonna want to come and see this. It was Jarrow. Bit busy, Reva said, and she put her lips back to mine as the buckle came free. The hammering continued. You really need to come and see this right now. He sounded panicked. Reva paused and glanced at the door, her brow furrowed. What is it? I asked, frustrated. I can't describe it. Just come. I was hoping to, I muttered as I helped Reva off the bed and stumbled to the door. Jarrow's face was pale when I opened it. Despite his augmentations and the mechanical lenses, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Hurry! He turned and practically ran back into the common room. We emerged, me still supporting Reva, to see everyone crowded around one screen. A news report flashing up images and short videos. Banners of headlines and reports ran along the bottom of the screen. There was a voice too, but the words were just noise to me as I took in the images. It was the Perth skyline on fire. Huge buildings, skyscrapers half destroyed, structures ruined and in flames. Footage of explosions took over, fully synchronized explosions across the whole city, dozens of buildings. That's where you're from, eh? Jarrow asked tentatively. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It was surreal. Reva's arm wrapped around me, steadying me, or herself, I wasn't sure. What in the hells? I stood frozen, unable to believe the footage. Footage of one of the terrorists in question has been posted across all media platforms. The voice of the reporter cut through my thoughts. Anyone with information about the attacks or the terrorist in question should contact. I didn't hear the rest. A low-res image was on the screen. Low-res, but clear enough. A hooded figure, a long coat, and a TAC Ops helmet stripped bare. Thank you for listening to Cyphers Edge. Subscribe so as not to miss future episodes. New episodes uploaded every second Saturday. Script and narration by JJ Brandis. Music was provided by Cale McLeish. Copyright JJ Brandis 2025.